Hi, everybody that's on. I just want to let you know that we are live streaming the event, today's class on our Facebook page, and we are recording it so that we can post it to YouTube later. If you don't want to be on the live stream, you have the opportunity to leave or just not speak or keep your camera off. So I just wanted to mention that. But we'll get started here in about 4 minutes. So we'll see you in a little bit. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our second installment of Grow Your Own Food. Tonight, Andrew Sipple, Education Coordinator here at Goodell Gardens, is going to teach us about how to grow vegetables with a bunch of interesting information about container gardening and companion planting. But first, for those of you who don't know, my name's Amber Wellington. I'm the Executive Director here at Goodell Gardens in beautiful Edinboro, Pennsylvania. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome you. We're really excited about offering virtual programs in our virtual classroom some housekeeping for those of you who weren't on earlier. We are live streaming tonight's class directly onto our Facebook page, and we are also recording the class so that we can post it to our YouTube accounts later. So just please keep that in mind. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and we'll answer those at the end of the class. And I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the evening. And I just want to show you a couple things on our website before we get started with the class. We want to make sure that everybody knows what's going on at Goodell Gardens this season. So I'm going to pull up our website really quickly. Here's our website, Goodell Gardens and Homestead. To find other classes like the ones that we are doing this evening, you can go to goodellgardens.org/learn and find information about our guided tours and hikes, our public programs, our guest speaker series, our environmental book club, and all sorts of classes for kids, preschool through high school. And so I just want to highlight some new things that we're offering this season, including guided hikes on our trails. So obviously our Along the Garden Path guided tours will continue on Sundays at 1 p.m. Throughout the season, with the exception of May 21st and September 17th, because that's when we're hosting festivals. But we're also offering this year guided trail hikes with Andrew as well. And so those are 2 hours, and we are going to do 3 of them, one in May, one in June, and one in September. We also have our public programs throughout the season, and our first one is actually next Sunday, May 7th, Troublesome Temptations. And so Andrew is going to teach us about invasive species, and you can just go to goodellgardens.org/public programs and click through to register for that class. And we also have our guest speaker series that's returning this season. We're quite excited to share that Goodell Gardens and Homestead is hosting the Great Lakes chapter of the American Rhododendron Society on May 28th. That event is part private rental for the Rhododendron Society and part public program. And so there will be a truss show, which is a cut flower show, where members from the Great Lakes Rhododendron Society will bring clippings from their rhododendrons for people to stop by and admire and learn about. And then at 4 o'clock that day, Connor Ryan and Dr. Juliana Medeiros will actually do a talk about rhododendrons, from horticultural hero to cancer cure. What research has your rhododendron done today? You can see later in the season, we'll hear from Leon Sam Briggs of the Tonawanda Seneca. He will share the value of native plants. Dr. Karen Eisenhart will be sharing information about permaculture design. Tracy Scott, former Goodell Gardens education coordinator, will be teaching us about herbal remedy gardens. And then David Wachowski and Ryan from Conservation Compost will be teaching us about municipal compost and how to get your food waste composted. And so that's awesome. We're really excited about all of our wonderful guest speakers. And then we're also hosting the Environmental Book Club, which is new this season. And that actually begins May 10th and goes on from there. The first book we're reading is The Sixth Extinction. And so each book we'll meet twice. And Andrew will lead those as well. So Andrew's sort of the star of education at Goodell Gardens. And we also have some wonderful upcoming events. Next Sunday is our second annual Tree Hugger Trail Run at Goodell Gardens. And so that's Saturday, May 6th. And there is still time to register if you're interested in walking, running, or just hugging the trees, but be careful because some of them are hawthorns and have spikes. And then the following weekend, we're hosting Mom's Market, which is a special day to spend a day with your mom or shop by yourself to find a perfect last minute gift. And we're excited because we'll be sharing some space with our good friends at Unity in Edinboro and the Unity Seedlings project for a seed swap and houseplant swap as well. So we're really excited about all of those wonderful things. And we hope that you can join us this season. There's more information about other events, classes and festivals and concerts fitness classes as well, all on our website, goodellgardens.org. And now I think, Andrew, you're up. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Andrew can share his. And we're very excited. I'm very excited to introduce Andrew Sipple, our education coordinator here at Goodell Gardens.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you this evening. And I'm really excited to share some information with you about companion planting and also about gardening in containers. And I titled this kind of a catch-all vegetable gardening tricks and tips so that you can build on what we talked about in our last presentation where we focused on starting seeds. And now kind of taking it to the next level and thinking about how you would want to plan your garden this summer, whether it's a balcony or a 1 acre lot or a 5 acre lot. Of course, if you have questions, just a reminder that you can put your questions and comments in the chat and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. And also a reminder, in case some of you are not aware, Unity in Edinboro, which is located just down the road, not far from us, across from Penn West Edinboro University and just a little south of downtown Edinboro. Unity of Edinboro has a seed starting room, and we've had many people come in and start seeds this year. It's been a really awesome community project, bringing people together in community and also in learning about plants and how we're connected through plants. And so I encourage you to check that out. We actually have office hours there at certain days and times of the week where you can come in and check out the plants. We're going to actually do a plant swap. We're actually working toward that. And so if you have any questions about the indoor seed garden or any questions about the plant swap, just let us know and we will get to that for you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we're going to dive into the first part of our presentation here. So just give me a second to put this in full screen. Okay. All right, so we're going to start with gardening in containers. So first, I want to make sure I give credit to my good friend Tracy Scott. She actually used to be one of our education coordinators here at Goodell Gardens Homestead, and she is super awesome and knowledgeable about gardening and everything to do with plants. She's actually a Penn State Master Gardener, and she prepared information for the slideshow. So many thanks to her. I think this first half of today's program will especially be relevant to those of you who maybe are a little nervous about installing a larger garden, or you're not sure you can commit the time and the resources, or maybe you just don't have the space. And really, it's amazing what you can do with just a balcony, literally like a 5th floor balcony apartment in downtown Erie. You could grow some amazing food. So we're going to talk a little bit about containers. So why would we want to grow containers? Well, you can grow food in a very small space. You'll see this picture off to the left here. If someone has just a backyard, it just looks kind of like, ugh. And they've turned it into this absolutely gorgeous space. And it's pretty much everything is in containers. It's amazing what you can do. Now, gardening in containers brings opportunities and challenges, and we're going to take a look at that. As far as benefits, less weeding. Think about this picture on the left. We have this fenced-in vegetable garden with rows of plants. There's a lot of soil space there, surface area that has to be weeded. But on the right, it's greatly reduced with the containers. Also, you don't have to worry about weeds spreading in the sense that they're not going to generally not going to jump from one container to the next. In the way that in a vegetable garden bed, you have to worry about rhizomes of weeds creeping along and making thatches that are very difficult to pull out. It's also an alternative to problematic soil. If you don't have the best soil at home, you can grow in containers and create a much more suitable environment. You can also help to prevent some of the problems you see here by growing in containers. This is a big one. One of the big reasons that is often cited for gardening in pots is being able to extend your growing season. So if you're growing some herbs that are not winter hardy, and you still want to enjoy the herb for a little while longer. So like basil, for instance, if it's growing in a pot, you can bring it in like in October and you can enjoy it for a little while longer in November, maybe even into December, if you can care for it, give it enough light and meet its needs. Similarly, you can also start things in containers indoors and the plants will be larger when you go to transplant them or simply move the container outside. So a longer growing season. And of course, you get a lot of different options of what kinds of containers you can choose. So staying away from tires, you can see there's wooden containers, old barrels. Just sawing a barrel in half can create a really nice container. Metal tubs, plastic pots, clay pots. We're going to talk about all these different kinds of containers and the pros and cons of each. But regardless of what kind of container you use, the most critical thing that I must impart, make sure that there are drainage holes. So if you're using some kind of item that you are like repurposing, like for instance, a barrel, and there aren't holes in the bottom, make sure you make sure you drill drainage holes because plants need to have drainage. So here we go. Here's all the different options, things that you can choose. And we'll go through these one by one and look at the pros and cons. So terracotta, of course, one of the biggest cons that come to weight is it's fragile. You see there the bottom bullet point, easily broken. They're heavy and they're a little bit harder to move around, especially if they're big and they're full of a lot of soil. But they're definitely more classy than plastic pots. They do lose water quicker than some of the other pots we're going to talk about. So it's important to keep that in mind. Of course, they can come in all shapes and sizes. They're easy to find. They're a good insulator. They help to maintain temperatures. And of course, they can last a long time if taken care of. Glazed clay pots like these. Again, make sure you have drainage holes. These can last a really long time, and they also insulate well. Easy to find. They do not lose water as quickly as the clay pots, which is a real plus. But again, they're heavy and they are breakable. And they can be a little pricey if you're getting ones that, because they're sold as decorations, so they're generally more expensive. Of course, the classic plastic pots that we're probably most familiar with. This is what I've worked with over the years, probably the most. The thing to know, there's a few things to know about these. Again, they're easy to find. They come in all shapes and sizes. They can last a really long time. They do not lose water like clay pots, but do note that the standard color for plastic pots is black. And if you know a little bit about just a little bit of like physics, generally dark things absorb more heat. So if they made plastic pots such that they were white, they probably would not warm up and dry out as fast. But the reason that I think people prefer them black, and the reason that's the industry standard, is because it doesn't show the dirt. The white ones would, of course, get kind of muddy looking, but it would be better. You can reuse these again and again. And it's important that if you have the ability to recycle them, and when you're done, or if they are damaged, you want to make sure you do that. We don't want any more plastic getting in the landfill than we have to. The best thing about these, they're lightweight. They can be moved so easily. But again, back to cons, they're not always considered decorative. They're kind of more utilitarian. All right, and then we have these other different things. I've known of folks that grow potatoes in bags like these. These are cloth bags. There's all different sizes and shapes, and these can last many seasons. Easy to store in the winter. They're lightweight. They do take a lot of soil, especially if they're the larger ones. And because the fabric is breathable, water can be lost a little bit easier. All right, wooden planter boxes. Again, these can last for quite a while. Depending on the type of wood they're made of, they can last longer or less long. They hold water well. They look very nice. They have a good aesthetic. And what some people like about these is they're elevated. So if you have a hard time getting down on the ground, if you're getting older, or if you have difficulty like bending down or going down and up and back and forth, this is nice because then you can actually work at an easier level. but they're extremely heavy, and you're not going to really be able to move them around. They're not super portable, and they are expensive. And of course, repurposed materials. I love that Tracy, as she was researching this stuff, she came up with this because I think it's just really creative. Taking this old dresser and these boots and pots and everything, and honestly, anything you can make it into a pot as long as it's got drainage holes in it. It can meet the needs of the plants that are in it. And of course, it's environmentally friendly to reuse materials as much as possible. I mentioned this just a few moments ago, but the plastic pots, don't throw them out. Use them again and again. The more uses you can get out of them, the better. And same with these kinds of things here. If you're going to throw it out and you can upcycle it in one way or another, then use your creativity and have fun with it. And of course, there are some specialty products out there. Just, if you do some research, there's some really cool things here, like this garden tower project on the left, or this wall of gardening on the right. These kinds of things are really cool if you don't have a lot of like horizontal space and you live in a city. Like getting into vertical gardening, you can really yield a lot more in a small space. Another thing that notes is that the size is important. The containers generally should be at least 6 to 8 inches deep. Obviously, it depends on the plant, but for most things you're growing, if there's not enough soil and there's not enough space for the roots, they're not going to do as well. And also they'll dry out rather quickly. Now you can grow more than one plant per pot, but the pot needs to be big enough for all the plants to be happy. And we'll get to this more when we touch on companion planting, but you also want to make sure they're plants that will like being next to each other. Spacing is very important. Okay, and then of course you need soil. There's different options here. Vermiculite is often used in seed starting mixes and potting soils. It's a mica-like substance that helps to conserve moisture. I definitely would recommend trying to go with the most organic products you can get. Keep in mind, and I can't remember if I mentioned this in my last presentation or not, but peat moss as the commercial product, peat moss comes from bogs that have to be mined. The peat is actually removed from the bogs. So just keep that in mind. There are some really cool peat moss alternatives that you can look into. But here is your standard mix here. 2 parts of Pro Mix, 1 part perlite, which is another substance kind of similar to vermiculite, a half a part of vermiculite, and then some compost. So, and you can see, you probably were thinking, oh, well, yeah, there's some things that do well in containers, but most things don't. Well, actually, a lot of things do. I mean, you can see here, we've got quite a list: beets, beans, lettuce, melons, even melons. I mean, I didn't even know that. Carrots, cucumbers, eggplant, of course, tomatoes and basil. So all these kinds of things will do very well in pots. Please note, you want to get indeterminate varieties of tomatoes. And of course, herbs. And some of you may be surprised, but it is possible to grow in pots fruits as well, such as fig, blueberries, strawberries. It's just important that you meet the needs of the plant. And of course, after this presentation, I will work with Amber to make sure we can do this, but I'm going to try and send out the presentation to everyone so that if you want to review like some of the more detailed information here, you can go back and review it at your leisure. So don't be stressed out if you're trying to write all this stuff down. Okay, so just some guidelines here. Compact varieties generally are what you're going for. So if there's a particular crop and there's a variety that's really like expansive, the compact variety would be better than that. Things with small fruits and shallow roots. And these are some really great places to look for seeds: Fedco, Johnny's, High Mowing, Renee's Garden. These are great places to order seeds, and you can get organic seeds from High Mowing. Care and maintenance. This is one of the biggest things that I have to impart to you all about container gardening, is that these plants in these containers, they're going to need watered more because they're, in a smaller volume of soil. It's going to dry out more quickly, especially if it's in the sun, especially if the pot is black and it's, really absorbing the radiation. So you have to water container gardens in a way that you don't have to water plants in the ground. Now, of course, when you put seeds in the ground or transplants in the ground in your vegetable garden, you water them as they establish, and if you get dry periods in the summer, you water them. But really good established plants eventually can withstand, a few days of dry weather. But a pot, even just one day, you could water it in the morning, and by dinner time, it could be really dry. So just know that you have to water every day unless it's raining and it's really getting wet, and you may have to water more than once a day. So that's one of the caveats, is just you have to water quite frequently. You don't want to get behind on it. Okay. Now, of course, you can do irrigation systems like this on the left if you want to be really fancy. There are people that have figured that out. Self-watering systems. Some people have even taken watering to the extreme with the picture on the right. Here we have a self-watering system design. That's super cool. It has a reservoir in the bottom and a wick, a drainage overflow hole, and then the water actually wicks up into the soil. So there are ways to automate this and make it, a little bit more, a little easier care-wise, maintenance-wise. Staking and trellising. Any plant that you would stake or trellis in the ground, you would do the same in a container. So of course, tomatoes, other plants that are kind of viney, you may want to put some kind of support system in. Now, just some growing tips. Don't put the plants out when they're too young. And it actually is best to transplant your crops into containers at a larger size rather than to direct sow. And just a couple other things here. Soil growing medium is really important. You've got to check for water at least once a day, and make sure that you're inspecting for pests and disease. And here's some cool resources like Rodale's Ultimate Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening, The Garden Wisdom and Know-How, and another Rodale's book. I should also note that we have a lot of really awesome books in our library here at Goodell Gardens and Homestead. If you did not know about it, when you come into the gift shop, the room right next to the gift shop is our museum room. We have a bookshelf in there with a lending library. And you're welcome to come and take a look at the books. And if you are a member, you can actually sign them out. So I'm going to take a little break before I dive into the second part of this presentation, and just check for some questions. Questions about container gardening, and then we'll just have a little breather here, and then we'll go into the companion planting. All right, I see one chat here. No questions. And Amber said we can absolutely send out the slides in PDF format after today's class. Awesome. That will be great. So if you have any questions, you can throw them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself.
Just a note here, Andrew, if anybody wants a copy of the slides and did not register, particularly for those who are at Unity right now, if you could collect email addresses for us, we can certainly make sure that those go out to everybody.
Okay, yeah, we'll want to make sure we get all the email addresses so that everyone gets the information. If you're not sure that we have your email address, or if you did not sign up online, just put it in the chat, or ask Jen Shepard at Unity, and we'll make sure that we collect all the email addresses so everyone gets the resources.
Andrew, we do have a question. When do we know it's safe to plant our seedlings in the ground? People talk about the last frost, but when do we know when it's the last frost?
That's a really good question. And nowadays that question seems to be even harder to answer than ever. So as we all know, the planet is going through some pretty dramatic changes with climate change and destabilization of a lot of the climate systems that we've known for a very long time. And it seems like it's very acutely felt here in northwestern Pennsylvania in the spring, and that we seem to get these wild temperature swings much more frequently in the spring. And we've just lived it the last 3 weeks, right? It was like summer and it was like almost 80 degrees or even over 80 degrees for like 10 days, 2 weeks. And then it got really cold for 2 days and then it got really warm again. And now it's been cooler. And we've actually had a couple freezes and things came out because of the warm weather and now they've been damaged by the freeze. And then of course it warmed up today and now it's going to get cold and rainy for a week. So one of a good synonym for global warming, and maybe an even better term would be global weirding, because as the overall temperature of the planet is increasing, and it's increasing in locales all around the planet, but yet there's also just like weirder weather patterns, more extreme weather, volatile shifts in temperatures. And that's really concerning because a lot of our favored crops, namely like fruit crops, if the blossoms come out too early and then there's a freeze and the flowers are killed, then that really is not good for the cherries and the other fruits that you want to enjoy in the summertime. So basically the first thing I wanted to impart is that, yeah, it's hard to answer that question because things are changing so much. The second part of the answer, it also depends on what the plant is. So some plants can tolerate cool more than others. So if you're putting seeds in the ground like peas or lettuce or spinach, you could you could plant those in April. And actually I planted some of that stuff just in the last few weeks. If you want to plant things like tomato transplants, pepper transplants, eggplant transplants, those you have to wait until late May or early June, because they do not like the cold. And again, it's hard to know exactly when that last frost will be. So it's supposed to be around May 15th, May 21st. You can actually look online, just Google last frost date, and then pair that search with the word map, last frost date and map. And you should be able to find, you do like an image search on Google, you should be able to find some maps. I believe they're USDA maps, and it has like color zones that shows where like the anticipated last day of frost is of the year. And I think they have it too for the first day of frost in the fall. And yeah, I've always learned it was around May 15th, but I've known of it to frost right up until almost the 1st of June. And with crazy volatile weather patterns, I would not be surprised if it does. You could have 3 warm weeks in May and think you're good, and then that happens. So you're not really safe until June 1st.
Yeah.
If you're in the
So,
mountains, like over near Warren, it actually could be even a little later. If you're along Lake Erie, you might be buffered by the lake, though.
and just to amplify what Andrew's answer was, my dad always told me that I can't put any baby plants in the ground until Memorial Day. And I think that that's sort of the rule that a lot of folks in our area follow. Just be prepared with, sheets or old milk cartons or something to cover your plants in the event that a frost does come in after that happens, right?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
definitely important to be adaptable.
Yeah,
and be prepared.
for
If
sure.
you want to start putting plants out around May 15th or 20th, just be prepared to possibly bring those sheets out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would wait until like Memorial Day or June 1st.
Yeah. And another question, Andrew, and this one comes from the group at Unity. What type of wood should we use if we're going to build a wood container?
Well, I would tell you, it's a real shame that the American chestnut was so badly affected
Mhm,
by the Chinese or the Japanese chestnut blight,
mhm.
the Nectria fungus, because one of the least or one of the most rot resistant woods like in the world is American chestnut.
Right,
And if only we hadn't destroyed the American chestnut in our forests and we still could have it as a source of lumber. I
right.
mean, it is very rot resistant. It would be great. But we do not have that as an option. So I know you can look. I've generally heard that hemlock is good.
Mhm,
It's rated as non-durable regarding, I'm sorry, it's rated well for resistance.
mhm.
Also like redwood,
Mhm.
Some of those types of woods are good. But yeah, do your research on that. I
Yeah.
don't know for sure exactly, but I know those are some of the ones.
So also probably locust, black locust, if you can find black locust lumber would be a good option. Teak or teak would work as well. Just make sure that you're not using treated lumber because whatever chemicals that are in that lumber will then leach. If it's chemically treated, will leach into your food and your soils, and you don't want that to happen. But okay, Andrew, those are all our questions at this point. So let's get back to it. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. You guys had some great questions. And again, I only know a little bit about rot resistant woods. So yeah, do some research on that. I know locust is one of the harder woods, so that's definitely a good one. But there's certain ones you want to stay away from. All right, so I'm going to dive into the next part of the presentation. And this is companion planting. So if you have any questions, just put them in the chat and then we'll take them at the end of this section. All right, hopefully it will take me right to the slide that I was on. Yes, it did. Okay, awesome. So now companion planting. This is a really fascinating topic because it's really looking at, it's kind of taking a more holistic, like ecological approach, like how do things interrelate with each other? You know, not just thinking of things in a reductionist way, like this is the tomatoes, they go here. This is the pollinator garden, it's its own separate thing. And okay, we're going to have these trees over here and they're separate, you know, trying to get away from that reductionist thinking of a bunch of separate parts. But how do they all, like, how can they interrelate and how can we maximize positive interrelationships to improve the yield and the success of the garden? And of course, and as you see here right in the title, efficiency, making things more efficient and easier. Again, this information is from Penn State Master Gardener Tracy Scott. And you probably recognize the name. She is one of our guest speakers coming up this summer. I highly encourage you to check her out when she comes to talk about medicinal plants. All right, so you may have heard the term interplanting or plant associations. A lot of this information comes from Rodale's companion planting and basically trying to maximize how much you can get in a small space by planting wisely. Some plants get along really well and some don't. And it's important to know, like, what are some good pairings and what are some bad pairings. The classic example of companion planting is the legend of the three sisters. You may have heard of this before, but it's a Native American tale. And it's basically about three sacred plants that go together. They work together like magic. It's corn, beans, and squash. And so you have the corn that provides vertical support and grows up toward the sun. Nothing is shading it out. And then you have the beans that need something to climb on, and they climb up on the corn. And the way the corn grows, they're able to get enough light. And the beans also, because they're a legume, they help improve the soil health. So that helps the corn. So the corn's helping the beans while the beans are helping the corn. And then of course you got the squash. It forms like a ground cover and grows, you know, in between the corn plants and the beans. But that helps to shade the soil and keep it from drying out so that you have, you know, a nice moist soil layer. And the three of them, they just work together perfectly. So there you have it. Just like I said, the support comes from the corn, nitrogen from the beans, and the squash helps with moisture retention and weed prevention. I forgot to mention weed prevention. Because there's a dense cover of squash, it's really hard for weeds to get established. Weeds establish very well when you have open soil. All right, so here's some basic functions. Companion plants do different things. So repelling with smells. A lot of insects are attracted to certain crops by the smell, and then they want to fly or crawl to that plant and eat it. And it happens to be your collard greens or your cabbage or your kale, and you don't want things eating it, right? So finding ways to confuse insects by planting other things that emit smells that distract them. Okay, so you can lure pests away from other crops. You can also shelter beneficial insects. There's some things that you might want to plant that don't necessarily bear any fruit or any food value, but they are really important in terms of bringing in pollinators and creating foraging and foraging areas and space for predatory insects that will eat the pests. Okay, so these are all very important. Combining these together can really result in a really cool garden. So we have the concept of polyculture versus monoculture. You know, if you drive around northwestern Pennsylvania, most of our farmland is monoculture. Any given field is pretty much all corn or all soybeans. In a few areas around here, you'll find monocultures of potatoes as well. But problem with monocultures is that they are susceptible to bad things happening. So if you have a particular, like a really bad year for corn and all you have is corn, well, then you had a particularly bad year for everything you grew. But if you have a particularly bad year for corn and you have corn and 20 other crops, well, any of the other 20 crops might have done well. And so you're not just relying on the one thing. And having a polyculture, it's more ecologically based. Now, this is important. Open pollinated vegetable varieties. So there's open pollinated versus like hybrid. So if you get hybrid varieties, you may not be able to save the seeds and get the same results the next year. So it's good to use open pollinated varieties instead. And again, I mentioned incorporate herbs and flowers and annuals and perennials. The vegetable garden does not have to be separate from where you're planting flowers. Now, you may have heard the term green manure, but that's basically like things you plant. It's like a cover crop, and then it's worked into the soil to enrich the soil. Legumes are fantastic because they have the amazing, almost like magical ability to add nitrogen to the soil. So when you drive around right here and you see corn in the same field year after year after year, the most basic fundamental thing of taking care of the soil, they're failing to do that. And that would be alternate corn and soybeans and then corn and then soybeans different years. But unfortunately, I've seen it where the same field is planted with corn year after year and it just wears the soil out. And again, use plants that attract, confuse, or deter insects. So you can make maps. I know this is a little bit blurry, but it's okay. You don't have to see exactly what things are, but you just see like the layout here. You can actually, this is like a fun winter project. When you're sad, you can't go out and enjoy the garden. Take some time and do some measurements, and then right by the fireplace in the wintertime, you can kind of sketch out and plan out like what kind of geometric patterns you want to have and where you want certain things to be in the garden and what will go well next to other things. So it's like there's like science and art combined together. Square foot gardening is a really popular method of gardening, and companion planting works well with that too. There are many ways you can employ companion planting in your yard. Again, you've got square foot gardening, but then there's also hilled mound beds, growing in the ground directly, growing in raised beds, even going back to container gardens. So some plants are good at helping others. We have a cool chemical called theophene that marigolds produce that is beneficial. And many of you are probably familiar. If you look at vegetable gardens, it's very common that people plant marigolds, and there's a reason for that. Now, not all plants are protagonists, so some are antagonists. This is very important. I know I'm throwing a lot at you today, but this might be one of the more important things to remember, because if you plant things near black walnut trees, your garden's not going to do as well. So black walnut, it's in the genus Juglans, produces a chemical called juglone, and it's basically allelopathic. And you're probably thinking, what is allelopathic? Allelopathic means that the plant is putting things into the soil that will hurt other plants or suppress them from growing. It's an evolutionary adaptation for survival. All right. So if your backyard just, filled with black walnut trees, you probably should fill the backyard with containers and not plant things directly into the soil around those trees, because the juglone will harm the plants. And you can see there's different ways it gets into the soil here. Volatilization from the leaves, leaching from the leaves by rain, fog, or dew, released from decomposing leaves in the ground, from roots, exudation from roots. So just note that some plants are allelopathic and they wage chemical warfare on other plants. Black walnut's one, that's the most famous example, but there are some other ones. Sunflowers are a little bit allelopathic as well. And fennel is a little bit allelopathic. Likewise, wormwood. So sunflower, wormwood, fennel, and most importantly, black walnut are plants to keep in mind. Okay, so here's some basic principles of companion planting. Maximizing root space. So, there's the basic maxim, oh, well, don't plant too many plants too close to each other, or they're going to crowd out. But the interesting thing is some plants are deeper rooted, some are shallower rooted. So it may be possible to maximize your efficiency and plant certain things close together, and they won't interfere because their roots are at different depths. Sorry, that image somehow got moved there. I apologize. Radishes have very shallow roots, so you can put them in right next to other crops. Just like same with root space, it's the same with shoot space. There are certain things like I already mentioned corn and squash. The corn, the shoots are up above, the squash is down below, and there's still enough the corn, if it's planted at the right density, there's enough light filtering down for the squash. So you can pair certain plants together that kind of fit together like a puzzle. In this case here on the left, you can see we've got root crops like onions and garlic, and they're interplanted with arugula, which is similar to lettuce. Onions in particular are great at filling in underutilized spaces. And just a key term is complementary growth patterns. So complementary roots, complementary shoots, things that are not trying to do the same thing. So vines need tall, sturdy structures. Put vines on something that's tall and sturdy. But remember, sunflowers are slightly allelopathic. A lot of people like to put sunflowers in their vegetable gardens. And that's not necessarily bad. You're not necessarily going to have bad luck. It's just the science is that they are slightly allelopathic. So that could affect the success of the plants in their presence. Again, complementary growth patterns here. We've got on the left, we've got some, they're either zucchini or cucumbers. And you can see we got them on this like really cool diagonal structure here, but then there's lettuce underneath. And lettuce kind of likes a little cooler, maybe a little bit more shade. And it fits just great there. On the right, lettuce and kale. You also want to plant heavy feeders with soil improvers. So there are certain crops like tomatoes and peppers that are heavy feeders that really draw a lot from the soil. And then you have things that are lighter feeders, like, for instance, onions. You want to put those with the heavy feeders, so you don't put heavy feeders together. And of course, you want to attract pollinators. So things like borage, cosmos, other pollinator-friendly plants. If you can do native plants, that's even better. And of course, there's trap crops, things that bring in, you actually lure in the bad insects so that you can get rid of them. Just make sure you use them wisely. And of course, host plants. So it's not, you don't just want to have plants that produce nectar and pollen for beneficial bees and whatnot, but you also need host plants that particular beneficial insects need for their life cycle. Fragrance, this goes back centuries, using herbs, fragrant herbs in conjunction with vegetables. Okay, so here you see on the left a combination of plants with different rooting depths. And here on the right, you can see onions and garlic interplanted with leaf crops. On the bottom, you can see an actual photo of that and how it actually works really well. All right, there's also companion planting in time. We've mostly talked about within the dimensions of space, but how about within the dimension of time? Well, you can put slow maturing and fast maturing ones together. And if you do it right, you can harvest the earlier crops and then they can be out of the way as the later ones are just getting going. So early season with late season, or fast maturing along with slow maturing. French intensive planting. So you see some of these concepts in action here in these classic French gardens. There's interplanting of flowers to control pests, small blocks of different plantings. So there's polyculture, so that you don't have one big patch of one thing. Cabbage interplanted with beans. Cabbage is a heavier feeder, whereas beans help to add nitrogen to the soil because they're a legume. And maximize shoot space. All plants are touching but not overcrowded. So if they're fairly close to each other, that helps, keep the soil from drying out. But if they're too close and they're like jammed in, then yeah, that's not good. Then you can have issues with disease spreading. So start simple. You don't have to know all of these endless numbers of combinations. Just pick a pair of vegetables you're interested in growing and figure out which plant companions would go well with them. You can try your own based on the principles we talked about today, or you can go with some of the classic combinations. Keep a journal and take note of how things do. And you can get super scientific and even do trials and see what works and what doesn't. The beauty of gardening is it's an opportunity for endless learning and experimentation. So here's some classic combinations: carrots and lettuce, carrots and radishes, marigolds and melons, marigolds and broccoli, or marigolds with just about anything. Tomatoes, onions, and marigolds. You can see here we got tomatoes and carrots. So a quick recap: maximize your planting space, attract beneficial insects, and that could be a whole other talk in and of itself. Knowing the beneficial insects, deterring the pests by confusing them, complement growth requirements, and consider nutrient needs. You want to reduce competition and create a garden that's more based on cooperation between the plants. And there you can see references for how to grow more vegetables and Rodale's successful organic gardening. So now I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I know that was a lot of information. And let's see if we have any questions.
Okay, Andrew, another question from Unity. Are there plants that will deter rabbits and groundhogs? That's a fun one.
Yeah, that is seriously a very fun question. It seems like groundhogs, rabbits, raccoons, they like to eat a lot of things that you grow. And one of my biggest recommendations is if you can get fencing around your garden, you will not regret it. Because those particular critters they seem to be everywhere. There are some crops that they should like less, like garlic and onions. I would imagine they would probably like those less, but you can do some research. You can probably find a few plants that they don't prefer, but I will tell you what, they seem to eat a lot of stuff. Same with deer. Sometimes these herbivores that live around here, they amaze me in the things that they eat. So if you can get a fence, or if you can get pest, we call them deer screamers at Goodell Gardens. They're these little things you put in the ground and it puts out a high-pitched sound that scares away deer and possibly other animals. And it also flashes a light. So using that, you can also use different scents to deter them. You can use deer away. There's different things that you can do, but it seems to be kind of like a endless struggle with the deer and the groundhogs and all those kinds of things. That's unfortunately a very familiar problem.
Yeah, we definitely fight with that here at Goodell Gardens. And so Andrew was describing something that's called, it's an ultrasonic solar powered pest control device. And it's motion activated, and we can make sure that we send a link out for that in our follow-up email as well. Austin seems to be over loving their plants. I can't keep a plant alive worth anything. How do you know when a given plant is overwatered?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so many different plants are different in their moisture requirements. And their moisture requirements, vary depending on what kind of container they're in, what the conditions are. There's a lot of different variables, but just a general rule that I've used, I haven't always gotten it right before, I will admit, but with house plants in particular, I've had a few that did not work. But a general rule that I try to go for is you want to be able to put your finger, like your pointer finger, in like maybe like an inch down into the soil, and it should just feel like a nice, just like a nice moist, it's hard to describe, but it should just feel like moist soil. When you pull your finger out, there's a little bit of like wet dirt particles on your finger. That's a general rule that I go by, that's good. Whereas if it seems wet on the top, but you stick your finger in, it's dry, you get down an inch, that it's not watered enough. Now on the other side of the spectrum, if you can actually see like water like almost oozing out when you squish the soil down, or when you push on it, that means it's overwatered. So it's very important to make sure you strike the right balance. Again, different plants like different things. I have gotten it wrong a few times with house plants. They're a little trickier because the conditions in a house are so different from the outdoors. They don't have the bright sunlight beaming down. They don't have the wind. But yeah, no, generally a good rule is moist about an inch down into the soil, but not oozing water. All right, if anybody has any other questions, you can you can drop them into the chat now, or if you'd like to unmute, there's an opportunity to do that as well.
Andrew, I have a question.
Sure.
What's your favorite vegetable to grow and why?
Ooh, favorite vegetable to grow and why? That's a great question. That's a hard question, because there's so many that I absolutely love. I love peppers. I absolutely love fresh carrots and parsnips in the garden. There's nothing like a salad from fresh lettuce. Those are highlights. I don't know if I could pick a favorite. I do. Tomatoes are definitely have a special place in my heart. I'm not one for raw tomatoes, but I love homemade tomato sauce. But yeah, no, here's one. This is more of a fruit, but ground cherries. Those are super cool to grow. And they're absolutely delicious. They look like little tiny Chinese lanterns. Some people call them husk cherries. You pull the little dry husk off, and there's like a little like reddish or yellowish. It's usually actually yellowish. I'm sorry, not reddish. Yellowish or orangish, like tomato-like fruit in there, and it's sweet, and they're really delicious.
Hey, Andrew, it's Austin again. Just gonna bug you. Sounds like you're super knowledgeable. It's actually really interesting to hear you speak. So, what's one of the really unique vegetables that grows well in our category? I don't know if we're category 5, but what's one of the more unique vegetables to this area, or strain of vegetables, I guess, what do you want to call it? That works well here as opposed to other areas with like a clay soil and that kind of setting.
Okay. Yeah, no, I used to be, and I actually still am involved with the school gardens in Erie. And of course they grow a lot of the traditional things, tomatoes, potatoes, carrots, peppers, lettuce, peas, beans, so on and so forth. But they have a few different crops that I've worked with them up there that some people never really thought to grow around here. So I mentioned ground cherries, that's kind of an unusual one. But another cool one I've seen do well right in the city of Erie is okra. I haven't really researched that plant that well, so I don't really know the exact specifics for it, but I know that that it did really well in Erie, and that's something that is used in a lot of really cool different cuisines. Also, there's a lot of really cool, unusual varieties of herbs that you can research as well. I encourage you all to try to branch out and learn about some of the other different cultures and things that people around the world grow, and learn about things that can be grown here and experience. You can experience new flavors and the joy of growing different things. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Okay, Andrew, we have one more. Are there plants to make an edible flower garden or a harvestable flower garden?
Oh, that's a great question. I will tell you, my go-to classic flower to eat is nasturtium. They're about maybe this big around. They're really gorgeous. They're usually orange or reddish or yellowish, and they have like a peppery taste. And they make a really nice little garnish on a salad. I honestly like to eat them just raw, right out of the flower bed. So that's that's like a classic example. But there's other flowers that you can eat as well. Violets, they're more of like a sweet. Um, I see Milton here mentioned daylily. Yeah, so daylily, you don't really think of that as a cultivated ornamental plant. But yes, you can actually eat daylilies. I've had them before. You trim out the reproductive parts in the center of the flower, like the stamens and the pistils and all that, leaving the tepals, the petal-like parts. And you can eat those with all kinds of cool treats like cream cheese and agave syrup and fruits and jellies. And it's basically like a lettuce, but really sweet. It's like a sweet lettuce. Daylilies could also be used in a salad. I see Beth mentioned violet jelly. Violet jelly is incredible. Amber also suggested nasturtium. That is definitely one of my go-tos. Lester Cisium. I'm not familiar with that one. I will have to look that one up after the presentation. Oh, I see what happened. You were asking for the spelling of nasturtium. Okay, I see. Any other questions? You can go ahead and unmute, or you can put your question in the chat. If you have any comments or suggestions, we could take those as well.
All right, it seems like we're getting close to our hour mark. And so I just want to thank all of you for coming out to see us and learn about container gardening and companion gardening. If you have follow-up questions, you're welcome to email them to us. You can respond to the email where we sent out the Zoom link. You can also email Andrew directly. Learn, Learn at goodellgardens.org. Goes straight to Andrew's email inbox. And we'll get back to you as soon as we can if you do have any questions. We're also just so grateful to all of our members who help make this all of our work possible. If you're interested in purchasing a membership to Goodell Gardens, you can go to goodellgardens.org/member. Our members receive reduced admission or on some levels free admission to all of our educational programs and special events, and free or reduced admission to, depending on your member level, up to 1,000 different museums, botanical gardens, and nature centers throughout the United States, Canada, and the Virgin Islands. We're really excited to have you here, and thanks so much for everything you do for us. We hope that you have a lovely day. Be sure that you check out goodellgardens.org for more upcoming programs. And we hope to see you next Wednesday when we open for the season. So thanks so much for being here. And any last questions, just drop them right here.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. This was great.
All right, thanks. Bye.
I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Take care.